Continuing on with Chapter 28, we're looking at the rise of progressivism, or a focus on reform in American society from 1901 to 1912. Now, remember, this is the time during which Teddy Roosevelt was president. He was a progressive Republican looking to make change, and his focus is on the 3 C's: control corporations, consumer protection, and conservation of natural resources. In 1906, a writer by the name of Upton Sinclair, he was a socialist, wrote a novel known as The Jungle, depicting the disgusting conditions of the slaughterhouses and the meatpacking industry in Chicago. He had meant this really to be the Uncle Tom's Cabin for the workers living in a capitalist society, that people would be horrified that this family depicted in this book had to go through what they had to. But the reality was, once people read The Jungle and they read this disgustingness going on in the meatpacking industry, people were sickened that they were eating this kind of meat, and there were no regulations overseeing it. Also, overseas, European governments started to threaten that they would stop importation of U.S. meat if something wasn't done. So Teddy Roosevelt and Congress, I should say, launched an investigation into the allegations that Upton Sinclair made in his book. And what they found was that most of what Sinclair said was actually true. Very few of what was written about was not true. And so people started demanding a change in this. So whereas he'd aimed for their heads, he'd actually hit their stomachs, as Upton Sinclair famously said. And so as a result of this, we see a push for the passage of the Meat Inspection Act of 1906 and the Pure Food and Drug Act also of 1906, which still exist today and have an effect on us. The Meat Inspection Act gave the government the ability to have oversight in all aspects of meat production, because this is part of interstate commerce. The Pure Food and Drug Act was a law that required the correct labeling of all ingredients in our food and drugs, that you have to put in or write down what is in the meat and the drugs and everything else that we eat in order to give people peace of mind. Once again, government oversight. The days of laissez-faire are over. Here you see an example of the slaughterhouses at the time. Okay, conservation, or focusing on the natural environment in the United States. Now remember, that's one of the C's: conserve natural resources. In 1902, Congress passed the Newlands Reclamation Act. This gave federal land to be sold off to fund irrigation systems out west. So this is allowing for the start of irrigation out west to create more usable land out west. We see the building of the Roosevelt Dam as a result, etc. Teddy Roosevelt also set aside 125 million acres of forest in the shrinking timberlands to ensure that it continued there, and coal deposits and water resources as well. But the disappearing frontier that we've already talked about, the fact that the frontier is closing, really did start to scare people. That maybe in a generation or two, people won't even know what a forest looks like, or what a tree looks like even. And so we start to see the creation of new organizations to try to protect our natural resources. For example, Boy Scouts of America was founded at this time. Also, the Sierra Club, which is still around today. This is a naturalist organization focused on conserving everything in nature to ensure that it still is there. But one of the leaders of the Sierra Club, John Muir, he's focusing primarily on all conservation, to keep it pristine, to ensure that it stays the way God had intended. He came into direct conflict with the U.S. government over the Hetch Hetchy Valley. The Hetch Hetchy Valley is a valley in Yosemite National Park that supplies water, electricity, etc. to San Francisco. John Muir said, no, absolutely not. We have to keep this pristine. If we start siphoning it off or damming it up, that's going to change nature. However, Teddy Roosevelt's administration took a different approach. While he said, I'm not looking to cut down trees, I'm not looking to get rid of it, we need to focus more on a multiple use resource management. And this was led by his head timberman Gifford Pinchot, or multiple use resource management, focusing on, sure, we'll use this territory, or we'll use the national park for, everyone can look at it, but it also should be used for business when necessary. Logging, watershed protection, grazing, creating hydroelectric power, etc. Use it for multiple reasons, not just to keep it pristine. Here is the Hetch Hetchy Valley, which today supplies water and electricity to San Francisco. So, Teddy Roosevelt was in office for 2 terms during this time. He left office to his hand-picked successor, William Howard Taft. He had been his Secretary of War prior to this, and he thought that William Howard Taft was going to continue carrying on his policies. He won the election against back again William Jennings Bryan. But the problem is, and we'll see this later, that William Howard Taft is going to take a slightly different approach to what Teddy Roosevelt would have wanted. But when it comes to his foreign policy, William Howard Taft, his foreign policy was known as dollar diplomacy. Namely, we need to use American investments abroad to promote America's political interests there. So all of Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, etc., they are looking for American businesses to invest there. So if you want us to invest our American dollars in your country or in your infrastructure, you better do what we want you to politically. So it's almost twisting the arm of the Caribbean or twisting the arm of Asian countries in order to get American investments there. From Taft's perspective, he really did see this as an extension of the Roosevelt corollary, which we've talked about already, giving us the opportunity to intervene in countries' political affairs. This was used successfully to maintain the rights over the Panama Canal in 1909. It was used to overthrow the Nicaraguan government in 1912 because we didn't like what they were doing politically, and therefore they were hurting our financial rights there with the mining interests. And it was also used in Haiti and Honduras to push for more of an American-friendly government there to maintain stability in the area. Now, when looking over at Asia, remember, we already have that open door policy to ensure that China remains open. We don't want that to be threatened. So in 1909, the Secretary of State, Philander C. Knox, proposed buying up railroads in the northern portion of Manchuria in order to give them to the Chinese government. Japan and Russia had begun building these railroads, and from Knox's perspective, this was potentially a violation of the open door policy, that they were getting a little too cozy up in Manchuria in the north of China. So by buying these railroads and giving them back to the control of China, this would allow for that open door policy to remain open and ensure that no one country took more of an interest in China than another. Here is Teddy Roosevelt depicted as Mary Had a Little Lamb, and there is her lamb, or William Howard Taft, who was seen, at least in the beginning, as his errand boy, or in Teddy Roosevelt's pocket, doing exactly what he wanted him to do. His hand-picked successor. Now, under William Howard Taft, like I said, he is truly considered the real trust buster. 90 lawsuits to break apart trusts within his one term, including Standard Oil Company of New York versus the United States in 1911. The Supreme Court ruled during this court case that there should be a rule of reason, that only trusts that unreasonably restrained trade could be broken up. So this becomes the law of the land. If they are unreasonably restraining trade, then they should be broken up, such as Standard Oil for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. In 1911, Taft went after U.S. Steel to try to break U.S. Steel up. Now, this is where we start to see the schism between Taft and TR. Taft and TR had been best friends prior to this, politically, I mean. Taft had been seen like he was in the pocket of TR. But Teddy Roosevelt had worked on the agreement to bring U.S. Steel together. Now remember, Teddy Roosevelt saw a difference between good trusts and bad trusts. He himself personally believed that U.S. Steel was a good trust, and so this is going to start to break apart the relationship between Taft and TR, because he is seen as going after a trust that TR himself felt was a good trust. Other areas of concern between Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. Now remember, Teddy Roosevelt has retired. He is no longer president, but he still feels like he knows what's best. He's still sticking his nose into the government's business. And one of the areas pertained to a lower tariff. Taft had promised a lower tariff during his election to the presidency, but during the time in office, conservatives within his party actually started to push for a higher tariff in order to protect American business. This started to create a division within the Republican Party, because remember, the Republican Party is a hodgepodge party at this time. There are some progressives or focusing on reform, and there are some conservatives focusing on keeping things the way they have always been. And so when Taft signed the Payne-Aldrich bill, which actually did increase the tariff, this greatly angered progressives, including Teddy Roosevelt, who's looking from the sidelines in retirement. Adding insult to injury, in 1910, we see the Ballinger-Pinchot controversy. Secretary of the Interior Richard Ballinger had opened up federally protected land within Wyoming, Alaska, Montana to miners. Gifford Pinchot, in the Division of Forestry, said that this was corruption, and he put it out in the press that Taft and Ballinger were corrupt in this dealing and they'd received a bribe. Taft fired Pinchot for his insubordination. Now, Pinchot had been a supporter of Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy Roosevelt had actually appointed him to this position. And so Teddy Roosevelt is getting angrier and angrier and angrier with Taft, not only for breaking apart U.S. Steel, but also for firing the head of the Division of Forestry, who he himself had appointed. And adding in that controversy over a higher tariff, we see the break between Teddy Roosevelt as a progressive Republican and William Howard Taft, who is more now focusing on the old guard conservatives. So back comes Teddy Roosevelt. In Osawatomie, Kansas, which you remember from the days of John Brown in 1910, he gave a speech in which he promoted his new stance, also known as New Nationalism, that the national government needs to play more of a role in reforming the economic and social problems of the day. And this is really where we see a split within the Republican Party. The progressive Republicans want to side with Teddy Roosevelt and have more government involvement to fix the economic and social problems, versus the conservatives within the Republican Party who think that that's crazy, that they need to still focus on laissez-faire. In 1911, the National Progressive Republican League was formed with Senator La Follette, who had really been a frontrunner for the Republican nomination as a progressive. Teddy Roosevelt, though, decided, angry with Taft's policies, to try to throw his hat into the ring, to take back the Republican Party for himself. He was angry at Taft for dropping his policies. The problem, though, for Teddy Roosevelt, trying to come back for a third term, was that he got into the primaries too late. He didn't have enough momentum to take him in and actually secure the nomination. So in 1912, the progressives split between La Follette and Teddy Roosevelt, and the fact that Teddy Roosevelt came into the primaries too late actually nominated William Howard Taft as their candidate. Teddy Roosevelt wasn't going to take this laying down. He wasn't going to allow his party, quote-unquote, to be stolen by William Howard Taft, and instead he will create a new party, or a third party, which we'll talk about in the next chapter, popularly referred to as the Bull Moose Party, or the Progressive Party.